April 1861. In Jasper County, southern Illinois, the apple and peach orchards were in bloom, and the fragrance of lilacs filled the air. It was a soft and gentle spring, but people were wondering, would this April be the beginning of a war between the states? For months there had been rumors of the seething storm in the east. There had been talk of free states and slave states. There had been anger and triumph over the election of President Abraham Lincoln in the fall of '60. 7 southern states had seceded from the Union that winter. But to 9-year-old Jethro Creighton, working in the potato field with his mother Ellen, these problems were not enough to dim the goodness of an April morning.
Do you reckon we'll be through by the time ham and cornbread is ready for dinner, Ma?
Your hopes is making a fool of your reason, Jeff. We're lucky if these taters is bedded by noon tomorrow.
Look, Ma, here comes Shad.
Ellen saw the young school teacher Shadrach Yale approaching in his wagon. Shad was a powerfully built youth of 20 who worked as a farmhand on the Creighton's farm during the summer. He stopped the team to speak to them.
I'm going into Newton for some supplies, Miss Creighton. I'll bring back the latest news.
Seems like there's a deep silence all about us out here waiting to be filled.
I know. Try not to worry.
Lord knows what news he'll bring back. There may be war in the land at this minute for all we know. I'm fearful of the time when I'll have no boys left at home but you, Jeff. And the 3 little ones buried in Walnut Hill.
Jeff was silent. He was the Creightons' youngest child, born the same year that 3 of their children had died within a week of the dreaded child's paralysis. Because Jeff had been spared, his mother had a special tenderness for him. He knew she was thinking, too, about his sister Mary. Jeff had only been 7 that tragic night, but the memory would always be sharp in his mind. He remembered how pretty Mary had looked as she drove off in the wagon with Rob Nelson to a dance. What happened next he would never forget. A crowd of young toughs had broken into the dance, waving whiskey bottles and hurling insults. Rob decided to take Mary home. Their wagon was followed by a drunken youth, Travis Burdo, riding on horseback. Knowing Travis was armed, Rob tried to get to a farm for help. Just as he drove up the driveway, Travis Burdo rode up beside the team and fired a pistol over the heads of the horses. The frightened animals bolted through a fence, overturning the wagon. Mary was dead when Rob pulled her from the wreckage. The whole countryside was in an uproar the next day when news of the tragedy got around. A mob of 50 armed men stopped at the Creighton cabin to tell Matt Creighton they were going to hunt down Travis Burdo and hang him. Matt pleaded with them not to, and such was their respect for him that they listened. But Jeff had never understood how his father could allow Travis Burdo to escape the consequences of his crime. Now, thinking about it, he sighed deeply as he raked the soil.
Be you spent, Jethro?
No, I was just thinking about things.
What kind of things, son?
I was wondering why Abraham Lincoln can't make up his mind about war. Is he like Pa, so against having blood on people's hands that he's afeard to start a war?
He's like a man standing where 2 roads meet, Jethro. And one road is as dark and fearsome as the other. There ain't a choice between the 2, and yet a choice has to be made. May the Lord guide his hand.
It was cozy and serene that night as the Creightons ate supper in front of the fireplace and waited for Shad to return with news. Across from Jeff sat 2 18-year-old boys, his brother Tom and his cousin Eb Karen, who had lived with the Creightons since he had been orphaned in childhood. Another brother, Bill, sat next to Jeff. He was Jeff's favorite brother, a big, silent man considered peculiar in the neighborhood because he cared little for hunting or wrestling and read every book he could find. Tonight, as usual, Bill was teasing the only girl in the Creighton family, 14-year-old Jenny.
This is a mighty fine meal, Jenny. You're a fair cook for your years. Of course, we might have had something fancier if Shad had been eating with us. You've been feeding him so nice lately that that he won't be able to say no comes leap year.
Jenny is far and away too young, Bill, to be thinking about Shad or any other young man.
I wonder when Shad allows to get back. I want to find out what's happening to those southern states which separated from the Union.
Face it, Tom. The North would rather have the South starve than give an inch that might cost them a penny.
But Bill, what about the right and wrong of one man owning the body and sometimes it seems the soul of another man?
I hate slavery. But it's greed and not slavery that's stirring up this trouble. The South asks only to be left alone.
Left alone to carry slavery into every new territory, to spread the shame of this land until democracy gets to be a word that only hypocrites can stomach.
Enough, boys. We're a family that respects one another. Tom, play us a tune on your guitar.
It was late that night when Shadrach drove the team up in front of the yard gate.
The Confederates fired on Fort Sumter. Major Anderson held out for more than 30 hours, then surrendered the fort Saturday morning.
So now it's war, for sure, isn't it, Shad?
Congress isn't in session, and only Congress can declare war. Still, President Lincoln has asked for 75,000 volunteers.
Oh, it's war. Congress or no.
May the Lord help us.
Don't worry, Ma. The North will take the South by the britches and make it holler enough quicker than it takes coffee to cool off for swallowing. This war will be no more than a breakfast spell.
All that summer in southern Illinois, bands played, flags waved, and orators spoke. But the picnic atmosphere soon changed as reports came in of defeats of the Northern troops. One afternoon, Jeff climbed upon Walnut Hill, where the Creighton children were buried. He looked out on the beauty of the woods and the creek below. So engrossed was Jeff that he didn't hear Bill's footsteps until his brother was quite near. He caught his breath at the sight of Bill's face. It was swollen and discolored with bruises and cuts.
What's hurt you, Bill?
We had a fight, Jeff. We fit like two madmen.
You and Tom?
Yeah, me and my brother Tom.
What made you fight?
Hard feelings that have been building up for weeks. Hard feelings that finally came out in hard words. I'm leaving, Jeff. I won't fight for arrogance and big money against the southern farmer. You tell Pa that.
Will you fight for the Rebs?
My heart ain't in this war, Jeff. But if I have to fight, I reckon it will be for the South.
Don't go, Bill. Don't do it. I don't think I can stand it if you go.
Now listen to me, Jeff. There's lots of things I want to say, but I reckon I best not talk. Get all the learning you can. And take care of yourself, Jeff.
Take care of yourself, Bill.
As Bill walked away, Jeff ran to a tree and hid his face. He had heard his mother say that if you watch a loved one as he leaves you for a long journey, it's like as not to be the last look at him that you'll ever have. Shortly after Bill left, Tom and Eb joined the Northern Army. A letter came from Tom, which Jeff read to his mother.
Dear folks, I take pencil in hand to let you know that Eb and me is all right. I miss your good cooking, Ma. You tell Jeff that being a soldier ain't so much. Yours truly, Tom.
Thank you for reading Tom's letter, Jeff. Your Ma's no company for you this afternoon. Maybe you could visit Shad for a while and spend the night with him.
It was bitter cold, and Jeff was half frozen when he arrived at Shad's room adjoining the schoolhouse. Almost at once, Shad asked,
How's Jenny?
She was crying a little. Pa's been talking to her about being too young to...
Marry me. There wouldn't be any question about it if it weren't for this war. But when I think of leaving Jenny, maybe for a long time...
When do you go, Shad?
Tomorrow morning.
Seems like I can't face up to your going. But maybe it'll be over soon.
I'm afraid not, Jeff. I wonder what the president is thinking about it.
I guess old Abe has troubles over and above any of us.
Mr. Lincoln, Jeff.
I think a lot of Mr. Lincoln, Shad. But lots of people hate him like poison.
I know. They blame him for his general's mistakes. They call him ugly and ignorant and make fun of his appearance, his grammar, and his family. But I agree with you, Jeff. I have faith in him.
supper with candles and firelight and warm companionship made Jethro feel much better.
I'll remember this night a long time, Shad.
When I come back, you and Jenny and I are going to have evenings like this, Jeff. We've decided you'll live with us and go to a school in the East, a university.
I don't think I can learn enough for that, Shad.
I'm going to leave you my books, Jeff. Jenny will help you with the difficult ones, and read the newspapers. Read all you can. You're a bright boy, Jeff.
Shortly after Shad left to fight, Ellen Creighton became ill. Matt said to Jeff,
We need some things from town. You think you could manage the team and do some chores for us tomorrow? I don't want to leave your Ma.
Jeff was delighted to drive the team 15 miles into Newton, to handle money. That was a man's job. He started off early in the morning in high spirits. As he passed farms, people were working and they waved at him. But soon the route led through a woods for about 2 miles. It was dark and silent, and Jeff whistled to keep up his courage. Even worse was going past the Burdo house, a name never mentioned at home. Jeff felt as though some evil peered at him from the decrepit old house with the sagging roofs. He kept his team at a trot until well beyond it. It was nearly 11 o'clock when he reached Newton. He went straight to Sam Gardner's general store. A half-dozen men sat in the corner. Jeff recognized one as Ross Milton, the red-haired editor of the county paper. Next to him was Guy Wortman, a big man with sullen pig eyes. Wortman called out to Jeff.
What might your name be, son?
I'm Matt Creighton's boy. Name's Jethro.
Is your pa with you today?
No, sir. I brought the team in myself.
Seeing your pa ain't here to answer, I wonder if you'd tell us where your brother Bill is these days. Some folks allow he's down south alongside the rebels shooting at our boys.
We ain't heard from Bill since he left.
Well, that's a pretty answer, only it don't quite satisfy a lot of us. You just tell me something. Is your pa good and down on Bill? Does he teach you that your brother is a skunk who deserves shooting for going against his country?
My pa don't teach me one way or the other. He knows that I think more of my brother than anybody else in the whole world, no matter where he is. And that's all I've got to say to you.
You tell your pa that lots of us around here don't like families with traitor sons.
There isn't enough trouble in this country for you, is there, Wortman? You've got to kick up some mob violence, get in on any killing, as long as your own hide is safe.
You better keep that mouth of yours shut, Ross Milton. I'm getting out of here. And I ain't saying what else I'm doing, but I'm getting out.
I'm sorry you had to hear mean talk like that, son. But you were right to stand up for your brother. I knew Bill, and I liked him, even though I don't agree with what he did. I'd like to get to know you better, too. Would you like to have some dinner with me?
Thank you, sir. I'd like that.
The restaurant was warm and clean, and Jeff's fears began to fade as he ate.
Now then, young Creighton, what sort of boy are you? Can you read?
Yes, sir. Shad left his books for me.
You're lucky to have a teacher you like. I had one once who taught me to respect the king's English. He thumped my skull every time I said fit for fought and heerd for heard.
I'd like to talk nice, the way you and Shad do.
I wrote a little book that might help you. I'll get a copy for you.
That second April of the war came news of a big battle at Pittsburgh Landing down on the Tennessee River. More than 20,000 soldiers were reported killed. As Jeff worked from sunrise to sundown in the fields, he wondered if Tom or Eb were among the casualties. And he wondered, too, if Bill had been in that battle fighting on the other side. Others were wondering the same thing. Emotions ran high in Jasper County. Some neighbors turned their backs on the Creightons, while others defended them. There were rumors of incidents downstate. A family murdered because they were suspected of being Southern sympathizers. A house burned down, violent attacks by night prowlers. One of their neighbors brought the Creightons a big dinner bell.
If there's any trouble, Jeth, you ring this. Now, some of us is bound to hear it and we'll come.
After that, none of the Creightons slept well. Then, one night, about midnight, Jenny ran into Jeth's room and woke him up.
Jeth, I hear horses outside. I'm scared.
I'll take a look out the window.
Do you see anything?
Way down the road. It looks like 3 horses with men on them, galloping away.
Jeth, I smell smoke.
It's the barn. I see flames. The barn's on fire. Jenny, go ring the bell. I'll get some water from the well.
But when Jeth drew water from the well, it had a foul odor. The well had been filled with coal oil. While Matt wept, Jeth stood helplessly and watched the barn, the hay, the grain, wagon, harnesses, and plows go up in flames. Men came from all over Jasper County to help the Creightons. They brought a plow, wagon, grain, and hay. They cleaned out the well and worked in the fields. One neighbor gave the Creightons a huge shepherd dog which slept at Jeth's feet, alert to every sound outside. But from Matt down to Jeth, there was a nagging fear, an anxiety that lurked continually in the backs of their minds. One day, a neighbor's son, Dan Lawrence, who had returned home from the fighting badly wounded, brought sad news to the Creightons.
It's, about your boy, Tom, Mr. Creighton. I was with him at Pittsburgh Landing when he was killed.
We want to hear everything, Danny. Go ahead.
Things had been quiet for a spell. Then on the 6th day of April, all of a sudden the Rebs attacked us. I ain't never heard such noise. It was just one awful roar of cannon and screams. Our boys dropped by the thousands, but Tom and I, we made it through the first day, and that evening we see boats coming from across Tennessee River with reinforcements. We was tired enough to drop, but we took off our caps and laughed like crazy, and Tom was saying, "Look at him come, Danny," when a Reb bullet hit him and he dropped dead. Them was his last words. He didn't suffer. He never knowed what happened.
Jenny worked with Jeth out in the fields now. The difference in their ages seemed to narrow that spring, and he was no longer the petted little brother. Jeth loved having Jenny work with him. She often made him laugh, and laughter was very scarce that summer and fall. The autumn of '62 was grim. One Union general after another was relieved of command as the Union forces suffered defeats. The people's faith in their leaders was low, and there was more bitter criticism than ever of President Lincoln. By late winter, thousands of Union deserters were pouring back into Illinois. The Point Prospect campground south of Rose Hill was swarming with soldiers who made forays into the countryside for food, killing chickens, raiding smokehouses, and robbing fields and orchards. People were afraid to leave their homes. One night in February, there was a knock on the Creighton cabin. 3 young men stood there.
Is this the house of Matthew Creighton?
Yes, sir. My father's right here. Please come in.
Mr. Creighton, we're representatives of the Federal Registrars charged with hunting down deserters from the United States Army. Is this the home of Ebenezer Caron, 17th Illinois Infantry, Army of Tennessee?
Yes. Been Eb's home since he was a lad of 10 or so. Are you telling me Eb is a deserter?
His commanding officer has reason to believe that he is, and that he's been making his way toward this part of the state.
We haven't seen Eb. He's not here. If you want to see through the house, he'll be
We
glad.
do, miss. The house and all the other buildings.
Jenny and Jeth led the men on a thorough search. One of them spoke sternly to Jeth as they left.
If this man, Ebenezer Caron, shows up, you get word to the officer of the Federal Registrars in Chicago right away. You fail to report him, and you and your family will be up to your necks in trouble.
It was an early spring that year of 1863. Jeth was able to plow in March. He carried a rifle with him to the fields. One afternoon, he noticed that each time he approached the woods on the east side of the field, the harsh call of a turkey would sound out. When he moved away from the woods, the call stopped. Finally, Jeth tethered his team and, taking up his rifle, walked into the woods, slowly and carefully, stopping to listen. The calls were softer now, and more certainly coming from a man.
Hello! What is it you want of me?
Put down your gun, Jeth. I ain't aiming to hurt you.
Who is it? Come out!
A skeleton emerged from the trees. The sunken cheeks were covered with a thin scattering of fuzz. The hair was lank and matted, and the Union uniform was ragged and filthy.
Jeb, I can't get over it. How you've grown.
Eb! It's Eb, ain't it?
Yes, I reckon it's Eb. What's left of him.
Eb, it's so good to see you. Ma and Pa will be...
Scared. Scared for themselves and ashamed of me. I deserted, Jeth. I up and left old Abe's army of the United States. Deserting ain't a pretty word for you, is it? Well, I done it. I don't just know why. We had another skirmish, and there was dead boys that we had to bury, and we'd been licked again. I couldn't stand it no longer, and I just up and left.
Eb, I've got to tell you, the Federal Registrars was at the house looking for you last month.
I was an awful fool. There's no place for me to go.
Will you stay here till I think of something? I'll get you some quilts and what grub I can lay hands on. You rest for a spell, and then we'll think what's to be done when you get a little stronger.
I know better, Jeth. You nor no one else can help me now. Not even old Abe himself.
Never in his 11 years had Jeth been faced with such a fearful decision. His family would be in serious trouble if he didn't report Eb. And how could his loyalty to his brother Tom and all the others who had fought and died be true if he helped a man who simply said, "I quit"? On the other hand, how could he send his cousin to his death? And how did he know what he'd be like if he were sick and scared and hopeless? All that night, Jeth wrestled with his problem. He thought of Eb's words.
You nor no one else can help me now. Not even old Abe himself.
What if he put it up to Mr. Lincoln? He was a man who looked at problems from all sides, but would he dare? How could he say it? Finally, Jeth got out of bed, lit a candle, and took out the book on English usage that Ross Milton had given him. Then he began to write carefully and laboriously on a piece of rough lined paper. The next morning, Jeth mailed the letter to President Lincoln and waited anxiously.
If I could be sure I'm doing the right thing, but I don't know. Maybe the next time the Federal Registrars come, they'll take me.
The answer to Jeth's letter came one noon when the Creightons were all seated at dinner. It was addressed to Jeth in a small, cramped handwriting in very black ink and postmarked Washington, D.C.
Looks like pretty important mail you're getting, son.
While Jeth read the letter to himself, there wasn't a sound in the cabin. Then he swallowed hard and read it out loud.
Dear Jethro, the problem which you have described is one among many others that has troubled both my waking thoughts and those that intrude upon my sleep. I had, however, made a decision relative to this problem only a few days before receiving your letter. There will be much criticism of that decision, but you will understand when I say that if it be a wrong one, I have then erred on the side of mercy. The conditions of that decision are as follows. All soldiers temporarily absent from their posts who will report at certain points designated by local recruit officers by April 1st will be restored to their respective regiments without punishment. This information you may relay to the young man in question, and I pray that the remorse and despair which he has known since his desertion will bring his better self to the cause for which so many of his young compatriots have laid down their lives. May God bless you for the earnestness with which you have tried to seek what is right. May he guide both of us in that search during the days ahead of us. Yours very sincerely and respectfully, Abraham Lincoln.
And so, the 3rd April of the war, Eb Caron reported back to duty. He wrote the Creightons,
It's hard to have some fellas hate you for what you've done, but the blame is mine, and I'll take what they say to me and do my job until I fall over.
That May of 1863 came news of another Union disaster, this time at Chancellorsville, where 17,000 Union soldiers had gone either to their deaths or to a prison camp. The same old fear haunted Jeth and Jenny as they silently plowed the corn. Was Shadrach Yale one of those 17,000? Then in late June came a letter from Shad saying he had survived another battle. Still, Jenny trembled as she read it to Jeth.
Oh, Jeth, I'm so scared. How long can Shad's luck go on?
In early July, there was news of a great battle at Gettysburg. This time, a letter came from Shadrach's aunt in Washington, D.C. Ross Milton brought it to the farm. It was addressed to Matt Creighton.
Shadrach was brought here from Gettysburg with serious wounds. He has had short periods of consciousness, during which he has begged me to write to Jenny Creighton. He calls for her constantly in his delirium. I wish to tell you, sir, that I would gladly pay the girl's expenses to Washington and give her shelter in my home, if you will allow her to make the trip. I must tell you that my nephew's condition is very critical.
Now, Jenny. Shad is still alive. Matt, if you let her go, I'll take her to Washington.
Wait at 10 to 1, it's too late, Ross?
You'd better gamble, Matt. It'll be better for the girl to have tried to reach him, even if it is too late.
I wouldn't let him marry. I thought she was too young. So she is. Still, a man don't always know what's best. I only know I can't stand to see her suffer this way, if there be one chance for her to see him alive. But I can pay my girl's expenses. I won't have her beholden to a stranger.
It was all arranged that night. The next morning, Jenny, dressed in her best clothes, her face pale, put her arms around Jethro. They didn't say anything. Then she left with Ross Milton. The Creightons lived through many weary days of waiting. Finally came a letter from Ross.
The boy is still desperately ill, but he will live. I'm convinced of that. For if ever a lad seized life and held on to it with both hands, it was young Yale, when he opened his eyes and saw that little girl you had sent to him.
After that, there were many letters from Ross and Jenny which brought hope and comfort to the family at home. Finally came a request from the young couple to get married. Matt dictated his answer to Jeth.
My wife and I give consent that our daughter Jenny Elizabeth Creighton, age 16, may marry Shadrach Yale, Union soldier, under the witness of a trusted friend, Editor Ross Milton.
The next letter from Jenny was addressed to Jethro.
Please take down the Bible, Jeth, and in your best hand write this beside my name. Married to Shadrach Yale, August 14th, 1863.
The war dragged on in misery and confusion. In November, President Lincoln made a speech at Gettysburg. When Jeth read Lincoln's speech to his mother, she said,
It has the ring of the scriptures about it, Jeth.
In December, President Lincoln issued a proclamation of amnesty in which he promised pardon and full rights to any Confederate who would swear to protect the Constitution and the Union. Jeth remembered the words Lincoln had written to him. There will be much criticism, but if I err, it will be on the side of mercy. There was indeed much criticism from all sections of the country. The chant of hate against Lincoln became stronger than ever as the third winter of the war went by. Early in 1864, talk of the next presidential election was already in the air, and in April, Shadrach wrote Jeth that he and Jenny had seen the president as he drove through the streets of Washington.
The president's face is deeply lined and his cheeks are gaunt. But seeing him, You can feel how strong is his purpose.
In spite of the weariness of the war and the strong emotions about Lincoln, people went to the polls that November of 1864 and re-elected Abraham Lincoln as president. The North had won a series of victories and the end of the war seemed near. Still, it dragged on, and for the Creightons and many other families, the anxiety continued and the endless waiting for news. One day a letter came from Eb telling the Creightons about the battles he had been in. But it was the second sheet of the letter that carried news those at home had almost despaired of hearing.
A few days ago, I was put in charge of helping to feed the Reb prisoners we took in this battle. Tonight, when I walked amongst them, I seen a man, and I swear to you that I thought it was Uncle Matt at first look. The man had a light-colored beard like Uncle Matt's, and he had the same blue eyes. I stopped in my tracks and looked again, and then I seen it was Bill. I didn't dast to stop or take his hand, but I went close, and under my breath I told him I'd try to come back. Later I found Bill, and we sat together with thousands of sad men all around us, and we talked. He wanted to know all the news of home. When I had to leave, we shook hands for a long time, like as if our fingers didn't want to let go. We said goodbye, but then he called me back, and he asked me to be sure that I told this to Aunt Ellen, and so I'm writing what he said with a hope that it will bring comfort to her. Aunt Ellen, Bill wants that I should tell you this. He was not at Pittsburgh Landing. The bullet that killed Tom was not fired by him.
In early 1865, Jethro turned 13. He had grown tall and muscular. Matt and Ellen noticed a change in him. There was a reserve about him that had grown steadily greater with the years of the war. They watched him anxiously, wondering and sometimes fearing a little. One afternoon, as Jeff paced restlessly in front of the fire, Ellen said,
"What's on your mind, Jeff?"
I was thinking of some of the things Ross Milton said. Things about the war and peace when it comes.
I'd be proud to hear the things that are in your mind, son.
I can't put it the way he does, Ma. I just have a feeling for his thoughts, and I can't form them into good words.
Ellen nodded meekly. Jeff walked slowly out of the house. The look in his mother's eyes troubled him. So did the things that Ross Milton had said one night as they sat before the fire.
Don't expect peace to be perfect, Jeth. This is a land lying in destruction, physical and spiritual. We can rebuild the cities, but the hate and the thirst for revenge may make peace a sorry thing.
But we have the president, Mr. Milton. Do you remember what he said in his inauguration speech? To bind up the nation's wounds? Won't Mr. Lincoln do away with the hate and revenge?
I hope so. Our hope lies in him. He has 4 years before him and the power of a mighty office. If he can allow the defeated their dignity and a chance to rise out of their despair, then maybe peace will not be a mockery.
And what about the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery? Well, that's a great thing, isn't it?
It's a far star, Jeth. A dim pinpoint of light in the darkness.
I don't know why you talk like that.
Because, Jeth, for years after the 13th Amendment has become a part of our Constitution, there will be men and women with dark faces who will be looking for the bright promise the 13th Amendment holds out to them. What will become of them, Jeth? They are without experience, without education. No, Jeth, I'm afraid peace, when it comes, will not be perfect.
Peace seemed very slow in coming. February passed, then March. Finally, the 5th April of the war between the states arrived. In southern Illinois, it came in with a burst of color and warmth. That 5th April had only moved into its second week when the news came that the guns were silent and the war was over. Bunting was spread everywhere. Flags flew from every house. The color of April grew brighter. The orchards bloomed and the fragrance of lilacs filled the air. Then suddenly, the 5th April became a time of grief and desolation. On April 14th, President Lincoln was assassinated. The work of the farm had to go on. Jeth went back to the fields and plowed. But there was no longer any beauty in the world about him or any serenity in his heart. It was the saddest and cruelest April of the 5. It had held out joy and then struck in fury. On the last Sunday of that April, Jethro lay in the grass on Walnut Hill, rage mingled with grief in his heart over the death of his beloved president.
Jeth!
Shad! Oh, Shad!
Hey, how you've grown. How much you look like Bill. I can't believe it.
Shad, this is a day I've dreamed about. How did you get here? You didn't let us know.
We wanted to surprise you. You've changed, Jeth.
Oh, I wanted to see Lincoln so much, Shad. Did you see him more than the one time you wrote me about?
We saw him that night, Jeth. The night of the 14th. He came down the street in his carriage. He looked out at us and smiled. His face looked very old, but it was a happy face that night. I feel sure of it.
Shad, are you going to teach school here again this winter?
I should let Jenny tell you, Jeth. I'm going back to college. And Jenny and I have decided you're going with us. It's time you stopped plowing and did some studying.
Oh, it would be the finest thing on earth for me, Shad. But what about the folks? My ma has lost 3 little boys, and Mary and Tom. I'm the youngest. They depend on me.
You're their pride, Jeth. They want the very best for you. And they won't be alone. Eb and Bill will be back. It's going to work out, Jeth. You'll see. Now let's go and see Jenny.
They walked together down the hill and across the fields. A little distance up the road, under the silver poplars, Jenny stood at the gate waiting for them. Her arms were held out to Jethro, and for that moment, when he ran towards her, all the shadows were lifted from the April morning.